welcome to Word Wednesday, number 48. Can you believe this? So when we get into our teaching time, we'll be talking about the Good Shepherd. First, we're going to wrap up the end of chapter 9, which is talking about spiritual vision and spiritual blindness in the context of the man who was born blind. And it's kind of good that we're doing it this way because, as we say often, the chapter breaks are somewhat artificial. They came much later. When Jesus begins our chapter 10 by saying, "Truly, truly, I say to you," that he is continuing from the last verse of chapter 9 saying, because of this, here's what I'm saying. So it really is all one. And so if we can get someone to read John 9:35-37.
Jesus heard that they had put him out, and upon finding him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered by saying, "And who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you."
Well, I think this is fascinating, remember, because he was blind, and now Jesus, is actually talking to him, but he's never seen Jesus physically. Right? And then Jesus asked this clarifying question. What term does he use? Son of Man, straight out of Daniel. So when we're talking Son of Man, we have to think of the context of an Israelite. And when they heard the term Son of Man, they knew instantly this is a prophecy fulfilled. He is saying he is the Messiah. So Jesus performs the miracle and heals him physically, but now we're getting into the spiritual healing. And this one arguably is the most important one. And Jesus is not going to miss this opportunity.
I love the picture of Jesus, it says Jesus finding him, or Jesus found him. And just so he goes to the water, right? He's washed clean of the water, and then he comes out, and everything's all new. He hasn't seen anything before, so he's taking all this in. And I think of my own time after my baptism. I was 18 and I kind of wandered. I didn't have any footing, and Jesus was always there. But I love how Jesus will seek you out. You have to be ready to take that next step, and he has that here. This is a picture of a street. It's underground today, but it was a Roman street that ran all the way along. If you've seen pictures of the Western Wall area, it actually runs under the modern Western Wall, and it goes all the way down the entire side of the Temple Mount complex. So it's probably a street like this, busy, bustling, and Jesus finds the man, and it says, do you know who it is? Right out of John chapter 4, verse 26, with the conversation with the woman at the well. Another parallel here. Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one who I'm speaking to you." So Jesus is revealing himself. And the fact that he pursued the Samaritan woman, and he pursues this man, and we're going to see next chapter the whole shepherd where he's pursuing the sheep. And there's just beautiful pictures here.
The other thing that, just to remember, since we're kind of picking up from last week, but remember the blind man had just been cast out, right? So he'd been cast out of the temple, and you remember he wasn't allowed to go into the temple because he was blind, and he just lost that. And at the moment when it looks like he's lost, who shows up? So Jesus comes to replace everything that was lost for his sake, right? So this is a fulfillment of that. So sometimes how many in life have had like something happen and you think, oh my gosh, it's the end. And then God somehow or another turns it around, right? This is that turnaround for him right here. And I think that's a powerful.
So the last passage that we ended with last week was, you better give us the right answer. We're going to ask you again. I'm going to start the music, and if you don't bow down, then it's into the furnace. So these guys are getting that same treatment with being cast out of the temple. And then he stands firm. Jesus then finds him. But Jesus isn't done with those other guys yet, because we got a whole chapter 10, which is going to talk about how these guys are in charge, but they're bad shepherds. So I'm sure they thought they were doing the right thing. They cast the man out. They denied Jesus. And so one of the questions here, they were faithful. They knew the word, you could say, and yet they were spiritually blind. And is it possible to be a professing Christian and still be spiritually blind?
Yeah, I don't do the things that God wants me to do. I don't do it my own way, and pretty much make you blind with God's demands out of my life.
Yeah, I guess another way to paraphrase that is, how are we acting spiritually blind? And that could be either individual or the church or as a nation.
I understand it with my head. I comprehend what the words are saying, but I don't have it in my heart, or does it manifest outwardly, like spiritually wise.
I'm a practical atheist. I'm a Christian atheist. On Sunday, I check off the box. I go to church. I worship, I don't know what I'm worshiping. Maybe I believe in worship, maybe I don't, doesn't matter. But when I walk out the door, I do what I want. So I'm a practicing.
And Jesus is going to get into in a couple of verses about it's this paradox. If you admit that you're blind, then you're not really blind. If you think you have the truth, then you're actually spiritually blind. And so the fact that you and I, we can admit that we've got blind spots, like spiritually and literally sometimes, is a sign that we're still walking in His will, and that we're a work in progress, and we're never going to arrive until that day.
Lance, did you have something?
Well, I think even, as far as spiritual blindness, even in the church, right? I grew up in church, and you get spiritually blind because it becomes as much about tradition, church history, and so in some ways you're empathetic to the ones that threw them out, because sometimes you feel it yourself, because it becomes more about doing church than it does worshiping Jesus.
Yeah, it seems like to me, a lot of times the rules or that type of thing get in the way of the Holy Spirit. And sometimes the most important thing is to not quash the Spirit, right? So the rules were there for a purpose, but a lot of times the whole purpose is lost in the implementation of the rules without.
Yeah, and the command is to love your neighbor, right? And so Jesus would say, if the rule is getting in the way of loving your neighbor, then we've got a problem with that rule. So the last question, go on.
Let's go on to 38 through 39.
And he said, I believe, Lord. And he worshiped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world so that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind.
So when we go slower, it's good because we can go deeper, but then we also need to remember to take a step back and get the drone out and get the high view. So he first said the man Jesus in verse 11. Then he says, well, I think he's a prophet in verse 17. Well, I think he came from God in verse 32. Then he's the Son of Man, and now here he's Lord. Right? So the man has come to the realization that Jesus is Lord. He believes, and it's beyond it's not just an intellectual agreement. He's worshiping. He's actively backing up the fact that he believes Jesus is Lord.
And notice how Jesus encounters him, and heals him, and then he shows up at the very end. Mm-hmm. It's like Jesus isn't micromanaging this whole thing. Right? He has an encounter with him. He meets a physical need, and then he follows up, right? And through that process, this person comes, and then he finally gets to the point, Lord. And what was his response? You remember his response? I believe, and then what did he back that up? Those were words, but what did he back that up with? Worshipped, right? He believed and he worshiped. So you can see kind of the process, and I'm just thinking out loud, but sometimes I want to hurry the process up, right? And sometimes we just need to let the process play it out. We need to let God play the process out. So sometimes it may just be, handing somebody food at Manna House and praying over the food, and letting them hear you pray out loud, and right before they leave, and knowing that they're going to be back in 2 weeks, and they'll go, hey, you didn't pray for me this, and start having that relationship, right? And them start to notice, well, why do y'all do that? Or why didn't you get mad when I lied on the form and asked and got 2 meals? Does that make sense? Anything else there?
And I even think our, and again, I would say our fellowship and our community is an exception to this, but other churches where you go to worship or you do worship, it's like, no, you worship, right? It's an active thing. It's not just watching the screen and speaking words. It's like your heart is in it, and you're giving it over, and it's an act. And so the question is, have you worshipped him today? Well, I think by praising and praying, we kind of already have. Worship doesn't have to be, it can be music. Music's awesome. I love music, but worship is so much more than the first 3 songs we do, before the sermon. So just reminding myself of that as I was reading this.
Yeah. So for judgment, I came into this world. Does anyone see a problem with that, or you see, how do we reconcile that, right? Because didn't Jesus come in the world to save, but this says he's come in the world for judgment?
Yeah.
Right. So there is no conflict, but a lot of people will try to put it there, right? Because I'll just put this right here from the Believer's Bible. It says, the preaching of the gospel has 2 effects. Those who admit they do not see are given sight, And those who insist that they can see perfectly without the Lord Jesus are confirmed in their blindness. So the judgment is those that pick judgment. It's like C.S. Lewis says, that there's no one in hell that didn't pick to go there, right?
It was awesome, though. I'm going to let go and let God do what he has to do.
Yeah, and kind of by definition, if there's a right path to go on, there must be a wrong path to go on, right? So by people choosing and making it public that there is a correct path, then by extension there's an incorrect path. And then Jesus, again, this is what Jesus is building up to as we move into chapter 10, is you guys are on the wrong path and you're wrong. You think you're right, but you're wrong.
Okay.
Next dude. All right.
40 through 41. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just a comment about for. I don't think he came for judgment. I think the translation there would be because of, in the same sense that because God so loved the world, he sent his only son. Or God so loved the world. Because he loved. So because of judgment.
Yeah, we had this conversation actually on Sunday in our Deuteronomy class, but there's two sides of God, right? There's the mercy side and there's the righteous side, right? So through righteousness, he has to protect his holiness. And righteousness says that there was a crime and there's a punishment and there will be judgment for certain things. And through his mercy, he offers this path. But both have to be held in balance, you know? And we always want to run to one or the other. But we can see, you know, clearly, you know, we're talking about the bad shepherds here later, and then we're going to hear about him talking about the temple, and one stone won't be left on the other, so that his judgment will come. He will come for judgment for those that reject him, that choose to stay blind. 40 through 41.
Those who were with him from the Pharisees heard these things and said to him, we are not blind too, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But now that you maintain, we see, your sin remains.
This is one of those John, like, what?
Yeah, I'm not sure he could have put it more awkwardly.
Yeah.
But what he's trying to say, I think Chris already mentioned, is that if you think you can see, then you're blind. And if you admit you can't see, then I'm going to give you sight, right? So it's kind of paradoxical here, but it's kind of like saying, it's kind of like a different context, but kind of like the rich young ruler, right? That said, well, I've kept all the commandments, right? He couldn't see that, right? And Jesus tried to give him sight, and he says, okay, if you've kept all those, then sell everything and give it to the poor, right? And then, ooh, I have a problem there, right? So he's trying to tell you that if you're perfect in your own eyes, then you don't need Jesus, and he can't help you.
You know me, right? So I spent a lot of years just having a visceral reaction whenever I saw the word Pharisees, right? Those are the bad guys. And then I started peeling back a little bit deeper. And it's like, well, A, they're not all bad, but B, they're there to teach us. And it's so easy to point a finger at them, but then we've got, as we say, we've always got the three pointing back at us. And then this got me to thinking, that first question there, what do you do if you encounter someone who's blind? Jesus is calling this group of Pharisees blind. Yeah, you're blind. You deserve to be blind. Is that how we would react? No, right? We would have compassion with them, and we would help them, and so we should do the same to one who's spiritually blind.
Yeah. So the question is how do we act when we come across people that are obviously blind?
Just like I'm
It was
blind
so
right now
powerful.
without my slides. No.
Yeah.
That verse was going to say, Isaiah 42:18, hear you who are deaf, and look who you are blind, so that you may see. So it's not necessarily John and Jesus, talking this way. It's all the way back in Isaiah, this paradox of the deaf hear and the blind see. Go ahead. Good save, Jonathan. Thank you.
Well, I have some friends that I used to worship with in a building, and when they speak of Jesus, it's been 5 years, and they're still in their baby. They're still drinking milk. I have to have compassion on them because they just don't get it, and sometimes it's pity.
I think I've been watching the news with all the thing that happened Saturday, and you can see in some of the news coverage, like if you watch MSNBC and CNN and some of those, they will say, we don't know how he didn't get killed, but it must have been providence, right? So they say providence, right? So even they can't acknowledge it. Now you could laugh and point and I'm tempted to do that. But the truth of the matter here is that this may be an opportunity for us to reach them, right? So if we can use that as an open door, like they've just opened the door to Providence. They've said it all in their own newscast. So those people that don't believe in God somehow or another believe in Providence. Well, isn't Providence divine providence, you know? So what I'm trying to say is look at things from a different perspective, like Chris was saying. Instead of just dismissing them, look for where the door is open, right? Where can we reach them, right? Peter said, or Paul said he had to be all things to all people so that he might save some, right? That's what we've got to do, is we got to be able to
break down the us and them walls.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
There are some other passages, I'm not going to read them for the sake of time, but Matthew, in other words, Jesus uses this idiom of blindness very consistently. But now they have both seen and hated me, so they have seen my Father as well. That's John 15. Matthew 15, leave them alone. They are blind guides of blind people. If a blind person who is blind guides another who is blind, both will fall into a pit. And so again, just like they're blind. It's almost like when he at the cross says, forgive them for they know not what they do. So he's, they're condemning themselves enough by being blind. We don't need to pile on. And so I think maybe second only to this spiritual blindness, spiritual sight, I think the number one idiom, and I'm going to segue into chapter 10 here, in the Bible has got to be sheep and shepherd. It is just all the way through. And why does this do this? There it goes. So we have this imagery in John 10, but it starts all the way back. It starts back with Abel was a shepherd. And we have Abraham was a shepherd, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph was a shepherd. Of course, David was a shepherd. And that gets into where Jesus is hearkening back to not just Psalm 23, not just David as a shepherd, but specifically Ezekiel 34 is all through this chapter, and it was really fascinating to dig into. One verse says in 34:23, this is a prophecy, so this is after the time of David, I will appoint one of them over them one shepherd, my servant David, he will feed them, he will feed himself and be their shepherd. And Ezekiel, I've got some notes in the handout. The first part of Ezekiel 34 is this indictment against the leaders. And Ezekiel uses this imagery of their shepherds who don't care about the sheep. All they care about is themselves. Jesus is going to pick up on that and go into this in John chapter 10.
And
so I think it's fascinating.
And he wrote that many years after David. So he wasn't talking literal David. He was talking about the second.
Yeah, probably 400 or 500 years later, and then 500 or 600 years before Jesus. So right in the middle, you've got Ezekiel 34 talking about these bad shepherds, and they're going to cause the sheep to be scattered. And then along comes Jesus, and he's using, Jesus was a stonemason. We use the term carpenter, but probably a stonemason. Most of the disciples were, a lot of them were fishermen. They didn't have, shepherds among them, but yet his number one image was sheep and shepherd. And we're going to see that all the way through. Yeah. Builder. Yeah. Yeah, they didn't have a lot of wood in that area. It wasn't really where he wasn't a major forested area, but there was a lot of rock. And so he probably used a lot of that. The other thing that's very unique about John chapter 10, and John chapter 10 and John chapter 15 have this very figurative language. So John chapter 15 is the vine and the branches. John doesn't do this. We're comfortable with it because Matthew, Mark, and Luke all do it. But John doesn't use a lot of figurative language like this. But here he does in a big way in John chapter 10. There's an interesting discussion on whether these are actually parables or not. But the fact, whatever you call them, he's using this, and this is a picture of a sheep gate. And a shepherd would often, if there was no physical gate, then the shepherd would lie there himself. And then you think, well, Jesus in this next chapter says, I am the gate, I'm the door. And then he also says, I'm the good shepherd. Well, how could he be both? Well, that's what they were. They were both. They were both the gate and the shepherd. And so you just kind of see this beautiful picture coming together. And so you could read this kind of make it into a Matthew-style parable. The kingdom of heaven is like, two shepherds, one was good, one was bad, whatever you want to do. I did some of that just to have some fun in the background video. But this shepherd imagery is just throughout.
Let's go ahead and read 1 and 2.
Truly, truly, I say to you, the one who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But the one who entered by the door is the shepherd of the sheep.
Qualifications matter, right? So what he's saying here is that you can't climb over the fence. You have to go through the gate, right? So he's saying that the qualifications were the Ten Commandments, keeping the law, being perfect, all those type of things. That's how you come through the gate instead of over the wall, right? And I think sometimes, even from a practical standpoint, we tend to water down the importance of qualifications. I just read the qualifications for a Secret Service agent. And for you to protect the president, they've now lowered it that if you can run/walk 1.5 miles in under 1940, then you can still qualify.
I can do that.
Okay, so 1940, that's 1.5 miles. That's what, 14-minute miles, something like that. Not exactly fast. I'm not sure the bad guys are going to be going that slow, but you can technically make it past that hurdle on that one criteria. So that just goes to show you, even from a human standpoint, about the standard. So one of the things that I think is the application point is sometimes I think we lower our standards, right? I mean, we lower our standards. We don't pray as big as we should. We don't, a lot of times, we don't hold our leaders up to those standards, and we don't enforce them. Go ahead.
So this is a picture, and I've got one on the logo too, if you can see it. But so it's got, they usually have like a stone wall and then an opening. And what's kind of fascinating is that we have just finished the Feast of Tabernacles, which is in October, early to mid-October. John 22 is going to say it was the Feast of Dedication and it's winter, and that is Hanukkah. And so we're moving into this time of year that's the late fall, early winter. Everyone remember when Jesus was born, where were the shepherds at night? They were on the field. They weren't in a pen, because in the summertime you don't need to be in a pen. They would just have their sheep outside, which is a hint, by the way, that maybe not in December was when Jesus was born. Well, that's another topic. But other times of the year where they would need shelter, they would have this like a cave. And so the sheep would move into the cave. And so it's kind of fascinating. He's using this sheep pen, sheepfold imagery during the time of year when literally the shepherds would be moving their flocks from the field at night to keep them warm because the nights are getting cold. And so they would, the walls could have been, this is probably ancient, so back in the day, their walls might have been like 6 feet high, still not terribly difficult to climb over. And if you've got an accomplished, sheep are not that heavy, I don't think. So you could, steal them that way. Or otherwise, the wall might have been in disrepair, so you might be able to find cracks if the person was asleep. And so you can see there's all these different ways that a thief could get in and steal sheep, except, the right way is through the door. And so Jesus is using this imagery, saying those guys that kicked the blind man out of the synagogue are thieves and robbers. And that's really the ultimate point he's making.
And the sheepfold a lot of times was in a small town or a city. So there would be lots of shepherds. We're going to get into that in the next verse. And they'd have one person at the sheepfold watching all of them. So the person at the sheepfold had to be very trustworthy, right? Because you would come in as a shepherd, you would drop your sheep there, and then you'd go in for dinner or to visit family and sleep overnight, and they would be in trusted care, right? Which is what they were expecting.
Yes. And when you came back in the morning, if you had 3 or 4 shepherds, you got all these sheep mixed together, how would you know that? Well, they would call them by name. Each shepherd would call his own sheep. And I was reading that the names wouldn't be like, Sally or Bob. It would be a long nose or, floppy ear or something along those, some kind of distinguishing characteristic. When I think about God calling me, I hope he doesn't use, my physical characteristics. I hope he has a better name than that. But I did find it kind of humorous that, hey, come here, floppy ear. You're with me today. So.
Well, if you know other cultures, they kind of do that in other cultures, right? I mean, if you're in Latin America, and the person's really skinny, they'll call them flaquita, or if they're big, they call them gordo or gordito, And that's so, just how they operate, right?
I would be chin that doesn't stop, maybe. You'd be deviated septum.
Yeah, exactly. Or shoeless.
Shoeless Joe.
10, 3, and 4.
To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep listen to his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he puts all his own sheep outside, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice.
Yeah, so the visuals here are quite outstanding, and we kind of talked about this, but you have to imagine the pen, and the sheep belong to several different shepherds. He's going to walk into the pen, he's going to call his sheep are going to come out, and then don't think cattle drive, right? He's not driving the sheep. He's actually walking, and the sheep are following him like little ducks in a row when he's going out to the field. And what a picture,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah, I mean, just think about us. We're the sheep in this scenario. Hate to break it to you, sheep aren't very smart, but they do know to follow their master. And we use this phrase, "follow in the dust." Too bad Lynn's not here. This is a great picture of disciples following the good shepherd here, and I love the imagery.
no,
They're stupid. I know that.
they're not smart, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But so taking this to the next level, how do we hear a shepherd's voice in your own common terms? How do you hear Jesus' voice? How do you
Listen.
Okay, we got listen. Okay, expand, listen. Give me a little more. How? Scripture, prayer. Sometimes he speaks through others. We got the Holy Spirit, right? Now, that opens ears so that we can hear, that interprets a lot of times, helps us with that. Anything else?
Sometimes actions,
Yeah.
I hear what I hear you. Whenever you understand, you see something with action of following Jesus, okay, I hear that. You understand?
Yeah, and you sometimes sometimes if you're looking spiritually, God will give you confirmations, right? So sometimes there's confirmations involved. Have y'all ever prayed for confirmations, right? You're trying to determine which way to go, and then all of a sudden, randomly, these things happen. You go, oh, God, you're making it really clear, right? Or open and close doors, or there's several different ways that we can kind of hear his voice and know where we're going to be there.
There's a statement, and we need to wrap it up. When he says the sheep listen to his voice, he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Well, he's talking about himself as the good shepherd. And this is another hint in the text of how popular he was. If he was not stirring things up, the leadership couldn't have cared less about it. They wouldn't have paid him any attention. It was the fact that he was pulling so many people towards him, like this picture, right? He's, the bad shepherds want to lead this direction, but the good shepherds go in that direction, and all the sheep are going that direction. So the bad shepherds are going, well, we got a problem. We got to stop this. Our sheep are leaving this. And Jesus comes and says, they're doing the right thing because they're following the true shepherd. And so this thought of everyone rejected him. The leadership rejected him, but the people were following their true shepherd. And so we'll probably break there. But next time he's going to talk about what the opposite do. The others, they were not supposed to follow the bad shepherds. We see that happens today. So maybe we'll save that as a discussion point for next time. Why do sheep, professing believers, still tend to get trapped and follow false teachers and things like that? So we'll save that for next time.
Yeah, but just one other question before we go. What do we learn from being called a sheep? What is the point? Like, what can you apply to your life to? Okay, we know that we're not supposed to lead, we're supposed to follow. Great point. How about what else is a practical thing about Jesus calling you a sheep?
If people follow him, pray, read the word, they can be able to overcome the flesh, which is pretty much keeps their own stubbornness, all right?
Yeah, we're stubborn, that's true. Go ahead.
We need direction.
Yeah, we need direction.
A sheep cannot live without a shepherd.
Right. We have no built-in defenses. Sheeps are defenseless animals. They depend totally on their shepherd.
We're completely dependent for
Yes.
everything.
Right. The shepherd would have like oil, and he would anoint their noses so the bugs wouldn't get them. And it would also make the snakes, not strike them. And if a wolf came, the other sheep just sit there and watch one get eaten, waiting for their turn. Like they're not even smart enough to run, right? Is that?
The good shepherd's always there.
And then do you take a sheep up the mountain with a pack load on it? No, they're not load bearing, right? Who was supposed to carry all the gear? The shepherd, right? So how many of y'all are carrying a pretty big pack? We're not designed for that. And they had...
so the shepherd would use this to either bring the sheep back, guide them back, or they would, fend off snakes, flip them out of the way, or fend off animals with the staff.
Lord ever poked you?
Yeah.
Get you moving? I know I've been there. Okay. Guess that's a wrap.
All right, we'll pick it up next time with verse 5.
Jimmy, you want to pray us out?
Father God, we thank you so much for being the good shepherd. We thank you so much for your direction, and your ways are obviously higher than our ways. Your thoughts are higher than our thoughts, and we just praise you for that, Lord. We thank you so much for Cody and Chris teaching us the Word, of course, through studying the Word, and pray that we not only be hearers of the Word, but we be doers of the Word as well, Lord. Let us have a boldness about us for you, a fire and a passion for you, Lord, as we go on. Give you all the praise.